Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So in the very early hours of July 13th, 1942, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 were aroused from their bunks in the large brick school building that served as their barracks in the Polish town of Białogorze. They were middle-aged family men of working and lower middle-class backgrounds from the city of Hamburg. Considered too old to be of use to the German army, they were then drafted instead to the Order Police. Most were raw recruits with no previous experience in German-occupied territory. They arrived in Poland less than 3 weeks earlier. I start this book because it shows the downward spiral of normal human beings. They got to the point to do something extraordinarily atrocious. It's called Ordinary Men. This book was by Christopher Browning, and it talks of the Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the final solution, Poland. So in Poland, what a lot of people didn't know about Poland is, one, it was the first country that was captured by the Germans in World War II, and then it played a key role in the Juden-free campaign. Juden-free means free of Jews, okay? The final solution that it mentions was basically calling for the destruction of all the Jews. Basically, the final solution meant that there would be no Jews alive in any country controlled by Germany. So start in this book and read this, and you say, how can normal, ordinary people, and that's why I read that description, because these were just normal people from normal towns. These weren't killers. These weren't people that were specifically trained like the SS to be killers. The SS were absolutely evil. They were trained in methodologies to kill and to slaughter human beings. But these people were just normal policing type people. And then as you go through the book, you wonder how they could erode to be what they were. And the reason I'm mentioning it is these 200 to 300, maybe 400 men would have an extreme impact by the time the world was done. The world was done on the Jews. So this was not a war effort per se in World War II to dominate countries and expand. This was the war on Jews. This was Juden-free campaign where they were specifically trying to kill every Jewish survivor from any location. So in this, there's a quote that says, the Jews stood out in their circle of human obligation and responsibility. Such a polarization between us and them, between one's comrades and the enemy, is a course standard in war. So what they did first was, and this is why I talk about in other videos about America and left and right and the thought process there where people are pitting one side against the other. That's exactly what was done here. And a lot of things that are used in political campaigns come from the Nazi thought and the Nazi books. If you've not read Mein Kampf, which was written by Adolf Hitler, when you read that, it is striking to see what some politicians will quote and say, because the stuff in that is what they're quoting and saying, to drive wedges between the citizenship or the citizenry of countries. I can use America as an example, and I can use Canada as a very specific example right now on how these thought processes are trying to be forced out into the public view and treated as if it's common thought process. The idea, there was a quote that I read earlier today. It says the strength of a republic is simply that everyone is willing to sit down with anyone at a table and discuss things appropriately. We live in a modern time where that's not the case, and we let an emotion run things left and right. The only thing that damages is your freedoms, okay? It increases a governmental grip, which is what was done here. These things were done on purpose to turn people against their neighbors and have neighbors reporting on their neighbors. Thousands of Jews were surrounded, ordered up, and put on trains and deported to this area in Poland to be handled, or processed is what they call it. It talks about shootings. These men, in a 3 to 4 month period of time, went from, if they shot someone that was armed, they felt bad about it, to they were shooting elderly and children that were unarmed in groups and being fine with it. That shows how bad these folks deteriorated. And I will go to the, there's lots of quotes in here that I underlined. It's a really great book around an awful subject matter. Meaning, it's great in the fact that it described how these people just were drawn into darkness and led that way. They didn't have a choice for the majority of the time. But there was a period where they had a commanding officer that said, if you can't do the job, you need to go home. I will send you home. And most of those people would not leave because they didn't want to abandon the guy that stood next to them. If you talk to soldiers in the fight, they'll tell you in a time of war, they don't think about God and country and any of that. They're just thinking about the man next to them. They don't want to leave that man behind. They want to fight and make sure he's safe. They're doing all that to serve and protect the guy next to him, just like that guy's doing the same thing for them. To use that as a thought process in this book is striking because now you're doing something horrible. You're doing something awful. And the same logic in your mind is why you're doing that, out of camaraderie, because they're bad and we're good is the way they saw it. When the good that you were was reprehensibly evil, absolutely evil. There's nothing worse on the planet than killing something or someone that cannot defend themselves. There's nothing worse than that. I think it's an awful act of cowardice. And I think Christopher Browning did a great job in this. So let me read what the back says to you. It says, Ordinary Men is a true story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 on the German Order Police, which was responsible for mass shootings as well as roundups of Jewish people for deportation to Nazi death camps in Poland in 1942. Browning argues that most of the men of RPB 101 were not fanatical Nazis, but ordinarily middle-aged men, working-class men who committed these atrocities out of a mixture of motives, including the group dynamics of conformity, the deference of authority, role adaptation, and the altering of moral norms to justify their actions. Very quickly, these groups emerged within the battalion, a core of eager killers, a plurality who carried out their duties reliably, but without initiative. So basically, they wouldn't go and hunt and kill on their own. They had to be told what to do, but when they did, they did what was told to them. And a small minority who evaded participation in the acts of killing without diminishing the murderous efficiency of the battalion. While the book discusses this specific reserve unit of World War II, a general argument that is made is that most people are susceptible to the pressure of a group setting and committing actions that they would never do of their own volition. That is why I think everyone should read this book. Because when you separate yourself between us and them, and you condemn other people simply because they have a different opinion of you, and you allow groupthink to take over your sovereign thought process in your mind as an individual soul, this is what can happen. And it's an extreme example, I know, but it's an example just the same. So I'm going to open it up to the appendix now and tell you. These 350, 400 men were responsible for 38,000 deaths in their period of time. 38,000. So in July of 42, they shot 1,500 people. In August of 42, at two different locations, they shot 1,700 and then they shot 960. In September of 42, at two locations, they shot 200 people at both locations. In October of 42, there were three locations where they killed 100, 1,100, and 150. In November of 42, they killed 290. And then in two other roundups in 42, one in July, one in October, they killed an additional 1,300. And then it goes to November of 43. November of 43, they killed 16,500. And in November of 43, they killed 14,000. So think about that. A total of 38,000 souls ended by this group of people who thought differently than them. And so they killed 38,000 38,000 of them. And I say that because in the eyes of God, every soul is valuable, and he has a purpose for them. He knows them before they're born. And here these dudes killed 38,000 of those souls. So you can derive what you will. Our time on earth is extremely temporary. Eternity is forever. So what do you think's happening to those cats now? Where do you think they are when they were living in 42 and 43? Where are they at in 23, you think? So then let's look at table 2. It talks about deportation. And basically 45,200 Jews were deported to these gentlemen so they could handle them. And I'm sorry that I called them gentlemen, but these animals who have basically degraded down into this awful solution. This war is a fine example to look at mass murder, right? We talk about mass murder these days, and we think 15, 20, 30 people. As you heard there, the totals were in the hundreds each month, and then in the thousands when they had to empty facilities, when they were closing the facilities down. That's where those big numbers came from. They went in and wiped out entire facilities. We shouldn't forget these things. We should know that the political mindset is something that should be considered, and it is very dangerous, right? So the Nazi socialist mindset was the most dangerous that we've seen in the last 2 centuries. Prior to World War II, in the 1800s, you had the colonization of America and the eradication of native folks in America, which was the same type concept where it was us or them. It was never everyone as a whole. It was us or them. Those type things are still going on around the world, right? Africa is a very common battlefront. So is the Middle East for people that are us and them. And think, you don't have to have a huge varied difference of opinion. Use the Shiite and Sunni in Islam and the Muslims. Shiite and Sunni have been killing each other for centuries, right? And they are the same faith. They just have slightly different political views, slightly different religious thought processes, and they've been slaughtering each other by the hundreds for millennia. So, excellent book, awful topic, but it's definitely worth looking at. That's it right there. Ordinary Men. I'll use this as the thumbnail for the video. I suggest everyone read this book. I found out about this book from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life when he was talking about having the right mindset and how you see things should be done. So give it a look. If you like this kind of content and if you are interested in these type of things and these books and these reviews and such, please like and subscribe. We could use the subscriptions here at the channel. We're trying to make this channel grow so we can keep bringing this information to you. I'm Ben. Be good.